Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the ICG's Digital Academy webinar series. I'm Sally Alsop, the ICG committee member responsible for our webinar programme. So for today's webinar, we're delighted to welcome back our multi-award winning ICG member, Tom Woodnutt. Tom is the founder of the Insight and Strategy Collective Feeling Mutual, which specialises in global, online and mobile qualitative research, tackling diverse briefs from innovation to brand and communication strategy, creative development, UX and customer experience. During his webinar, Tom will be talking to us about how qual researchers feel about AI and how AI feels about qual researchers. Tom will also be covering the benefits of AI-supported qual and the centrality of humans to the process. The webinar will also include a Q&A session at the end, and we'd encourage you to come forward to share your experiences of AI to date. If you have a question and would rather I read it out for you, please type it in the chat box. Otherwise, you can turn on your webcam, raise your hand, and if you would like to ask your question yourself, or if you have something you'd like to contribute to the discussion. So this webinar has been generously sponsored by OPI. OPI is the platform for market researchers seeking to enhance their qualitative and quantitative studies through opinion crowdsourcing and audience insights. Using state-of-the-art data analytics, OPI captures the nuances of human conversation through crowdsourced opinions, providing real-time actionable insights. Imagine integrating these rich qualitative insights into your current quantitative data set seamlessly. With OPI, you can offer your clients a complete understanding of the target audience by blending numbers with narratives. So before we begin, here are some events that we've got planned for you over the coming weeks leading up to our Christmas party. Don't forget that we're able to offer great value sponsorship opportunities with each of our webinars and online events, and just contact Lucy if you have any questions or want to know more. So now I'm going to try and hand over to Tom.
Thank you very much. And hello, everyone. Nice to be on the webinar with you. Hopefully, the sharing screen is working and you can see.
Looks perfect, Tom. Looks great.
Great. Okay, perfect. So, yeah, this presentation is called A Love Letter from AI to the Qual Researcher, and it's all about the evolving relationship between this new technology and what we do, with an aim to develop a really mutually beneficial relationship between companies and people in the post AI age. So my name is Tom. I'll do a very quick introduction to who we are, then a quick intro to generative AI, then some data from a survey we did earlier in the year with Insight Platforms and Qualsy about how qual researchers feel towards AI, and then the love letter from AI to the qualitative researcher. So yeah, we're a qual consultancy, been around for about 13 years now, and we work into innovation and brand and communications projects, usually often using online tools, so online communities, forums, diaries, that type of thing, mobile as well, yeah, that's in different markets as well. And throughout this presentation, you'll notice I've been using AI for the images. So you're going to have to excuse the odd visual oddity that creeps in. That's just AI's way. And I've also used a face swapping app within it. It's from Midjourney, which is an AI image generation tool. And yeah, for a long time, I've believed that technology can inspire better qual. It was back in 2007 when I did my first mobile qual project, which I like because it could get you closer to actual behavior. And I've always been drawn to looking at new ways of doing things. That said, I did start my career in qual over 20 years ago now. So it's quite grounded in the classical qual principles of quality and rigor and doing things the right way. So when generative AI came along, I was took note of the fact that it's promising all these efficiencies, but also felt a bit of a clash between my old school focus on rigor, something promising to cut corners essentially, and my new school appetite for innovation. And I think that this conflict is between excitement at the potential, but also a sense of threat, at the idea that perhaps AI could do a bad job or even replace us. Um, as AI mechanizes knowledge and addresses inefficiencies in qual, that can have benefits. But what if it's the human researchers that are the inefficiency that it replaces and that it solves? And this tension, I think, sits at the very heart of our evolving relationship with AI. And it's quite paradoxical. You might call it the Uber paradox, because the more it helps us, the more we use it, and the more we use it, the better it gets. And the better it gets, the more likely it will replace us, which is a bit similar in some ways to Uber, which as a company is offering all this AI powered technology, which will help drivers in the short term, in theory, if it's giving them more work. Equally, the stated long-term goal of that company Uber is to replace them with autonomous self-driving vehicles. So, are we sleepwalking into a future of self-driving autonomous robot researchers? This tension is at the heart of the relationship. But rather than seeing it as either or, I think I'm more drawn to the idea of seeing how can we work together better, but hopefully without having our toes trodden on in the process. So I think we need to work out the lines between what we do, what it does, and how to make it a harmonious relationship. So I'm sure everyone's heard of generative AI. I'm going to talk about it very briefly, but AI in general, and this is the most kind of basic description I saw of it from IBM here, which is just essentially computer science plus robust big data sets, then being able to artificially do human problem solving tasks. And that could be many different tasks. Obviously, because it's a computer, it can do it at scale, it can do it without getting tired, it can do it quickly. But also it's only as good as its programming ultimately. So it's constrained by that, and it's also constrained by its data. So it's really about doing things that humans do through computers, to put it in its most basic form. Generative AI in particular is a deep learning model which is trained on massive data sets. So that's a subset of machine learning, which is a subset of AI. And as you probably have gathered, it's got a large proportion of the internet from a limited time period, and obviously a limited proportion of the internet, but it's got a load of data, of human data, of conversations, of articles, of Wikipedia, loads of stuff, some social media in there as well. And it's using computer modeling programs that model language. And this is, I think, really important to realize, because it looks like it's magic. Sometimes you do it, it talks to you, it understands you, it seems to understand you. It can process language very well. It passes the Turing test, that Alan Turing test of can a computer convince humans that it's a human? It's pretty unbelievable. But it's important to remember what it's actually doing. And what it's doing is converting qualitative text, words, into quantitative data. So it's giving them numerical values and working out the probability that, based on, in this case, a prompt you give it, and based on its learning data, it's just statistically predicting what sequence of words is most likely to be appropriate that follows. So it doesn't actually know anything, doesn't have a human brain, but it is able to process words, to assign probabilities to them and work out answers that probably are what you want. And it's doing that incredibly quickly, obviously. So really, it's a statistical probability machine dealing with sequences of words. I think that's pretty key, because obviously humans are doing something a bit more complex after our millions of years of evolution, or hundreds of thousands of years of evolution. The next couple of slides, this is taken from Mike Stevens' Insight Platforms. There's a great video on there. The link's just there as well, where he looks at some of the new innovations in this space. And I like the way he's kind of mapped empathy, which is kind of what qual offers at its core, and then reach, which is kind of what quant offers. And you can see that some of the innovations that are happening are moving research products, if you like, up that scale towards more empathy at more scale, which I guess is quite seductive for some clients who want the depth of qual or the openness of qual, or the emotional richness of qual with the validity of quant. So the steps he's putting out there, there's video feedback where people can do, I think that's Vox Pop Me is the example he gives, where you're doing video responses that can be automatically transcribed, that can be automatically assessed for sentiment, and no doubt automatically summarized as well through AI. Then there's avatar interviewing, where there's questions asked, but with a kind of faux, robot moderator, as it were, asking the questions. There's conversational surveys. Companies like Inca are allowing people to fill in a survey quant, and then a smart probe will automatically be generated. And again, open-ended questions can be analyzed as well. And then the autonomous moderation, which is really a continuation of that idea of having robots using generative AI to ask questions to get people to elaborate on their answers, rather than having human moderators doing that. So that's an interesting trade-off of reach versus empathy, and how AI is enabling more reach and more qual-like interactions. Obviously, there's some risks, as there is with everything. The ones that Mike's pulled out here. So, if it's proprietary data and you're putting it back into an open, like OpenAI, for example, that data is going to them. They're using it. It's been used to learn. Have participants, have clients signed off on that. So there's a question there. Risk of hallucinations, which is just the idea that AI will, in its quest to say something appropriate, it might just make something up. Bit of a concern for researchers who try and trade in reality as far as possible. Also transparency. It's complex algorithms that are sitting behind these things. It's not something like a simple car where you can open up, look under the bonnet, and work out what's going on. It's doing stuff. No one really knows how it's doing it, because it's often learning itself. It's a self-learning process quite often. So transparency is key as well. Knowing if it's saying this conclusion in a AI summary, we need to be able to say why it's saying that, and obviously provide evidence for it. So he also talked about the future, how we have to think about people, how we develop the skills required to integrate AI into workflows, if that's the choice that's made. There's going to be new competitors out there. There's going to be clients under great pressure to do stuff DIY. And I think for me that there is this threat of people just overestimating what AI can do, underestimating the value of humans. So I think we do need to do a bit of a PR job on our skills and what we bring to the party, which is really what this presentation is about. I think it's trying to pull out what makes us special, but also not ignore what makes AI valuable potentially in the context of research. So on to what qual researchers think of AI. Some of you may have already taken part in the survey we did back in earlier in the year. This was sponsored by Qualsy, hosted by Insight Platforms, and we got 167 researchers around the world to discuss their expectations and experiences of AI, just with a view of trying to bring everyone together, and so we can all learn together, rather than being I don't know, intimidated by the technology, or just not sure of what's going to happen. We found that most researchers were actually optimistic about it. Bear in mind there might be a sampling bias, because I guess we attracted people interested in the topic, but 59% felt positive and just under 10% were pessimistic. And from the discussions we had as well, we ran a workshop on this. It's a bit of a, excuse the mixing of metaphors, a bit of a double-edged sword of Damocles, because on the positive side, it's more efficient, potentially in places. There could be more inspiration it gives us for designing questions or analyzing. It's more affordable, which is good for those who previously couldn't afford to do research. Perhaps now it's easier to do it, because it's doing some of the jobs for us. I would like to say, on the other hand, but if you look at that picture, you'll see I seem to have two right hands in that image. That's just another quirk of AI, which I'll come on to talk about a bit later as well. But on the other side of the coin, there are negatives. So, there might be less creativity, because it's using past internet data to come up with suggestions of what you might want to hear. And obviously that's kind of constrained by an average of what the internet's saying. Less nuance, less sensitivity. If there's a probe, how could a machine factor in all the things we factor in? And likewise with conclusions, how could a machine know all that we know, in terms of conversations we've had with clients and other inputs that go into analysis? And here, that point I made earlier, that there's this risk that our role, humans' role, will be devalued. And if non-expert researchers are suddenly doing loads of research, then perhaps the whole name of research will be damaged. You can just imagine that CFO saying, "Oh, just get the AI to do it. It shouldn't be that much." And then a whole new bunch of competitors starting to do what they call research. Yeah, and in terms of impact, we asked people, where do you expect generative AI to have the most significant impact on qual research? And that was 90% in analysis. That was by far the biggest area of expected impact. And actually, that was quite positive. 80% saw that as positive if AI is going to help with analysis. Less of an expected impact on generating hypotheses, drafting topic guides, and creating reports. Even less on planning and proposal writing, designing projects, although AI can be used for all these things, obviously, and less on moderation. And really, it's moderation where there seemed to be most ambivalence, quite a lot of negativity. So we asked them in this question, how do you feel about chatbots moderating online discussions? And most people, 56%, actually felt quite negative towards that. It's hard for them to imagine AI doing as good a job as humans when it comes to asking questions. And that is a contentious point because there's evidence on both sides of that argument, and certainly lots of companies claiming that it could do a better job. So something to be aware of. So that's a bit of precursor before we get into the love letter, because having asked qual researchers how they feel about AI, it's only fair to ask AI how it feels about qual researchers. This does apply largely to quant as well in some ways, but it's really more focused on qual. And it's based on me asking ChatGPT to write a love letter to qual researchers to celebrate what makes them unique. And also it's based on having used lots of different AI tools, done some projects with them, experimented, lots of reading, thinking, speaking at a couple of conferences, listening to other people speak. And it's all kind of condensed into this love letter. So let's move on to what AI said when I asked it to write us qual researchers a love letter.
As I sit here amidst cascading code and throbbing circuitry, the algorithm of my heart can be described as being in love with you, my dearest qualitative researcher.
That's touching. And to all you romantics out there, I'm sorry to shatter the illusion. But actually, it's lying. AI is not in love with qual researchers. And that's not because we're bad people or we've not addressed its needs. The clue is in the name. It's artificially intelligent. It's algorithmically generated by electricity, servers, microchips, and code. It doesn't actually have any emotions. It doesn't have a soul, and it can't feel anything.
But I really do love you, honestly, my prince.
Yeah, I'm sure you do. But it's even been described as a glorified autofill, because when you're on Google and it suggests the next word, that's essentially what AI is doing. It's just filling in the next word that's probably likely based on its learning data and based on its prompts.
Ouch, that really hurts.
So there's many metaphors out there of what is AI, what is generative AI. Some people say it's a co-pilot, there's lots of different ones, but ultimately it's an actor. It's an improv actor. It doesn't actually know or feel anything, knowing and feeling. And this does end up getting quite philosophical and psychological. It's just acting in a way that seems statistically probable to be what is appropriate. And that's based on lots of learning data and based on the prompts you give it. So while it can mimic some skills of qual researchers convincingly, it's not doing it with the same level of discipline or human intuition that we qual researchers are doing. And I think it's important to remember that, even though it look like it's as good as humans, it's not doing what humans do.
I've dedicated myself to learning so that I can serve you better, babe.
It's learned billions of words from a proportion of the internet. And up until quite recently, that was only up until 2021. I think it's updated it to April this year now. But that means that it doesn't know certain things that are happening. It doesn't know certain emerging things. So when I last tested this, it didn't know what the drink prime was, for example, which is obviously a big cultural phenomenon of the last year. It just didn't know about that. So I probably wouldn't know about recent, global conflicts and things like that. So if you're doing forward-looking research, it's not going to necessarily be that tuned into emerging new things. It's backward-looking ultimately because it's looking at using the history of the internet, a proportion of that, to make sense of things. Its performance is a function of its learning data. So any cultural, racial, gender, political bias that's in the internet will obviously form part of its understanding of the world and the way it conceptualizes the world. It's very Western generative AI, at least from OpenAI, which is one of the leading providers of this technology. It's got a very Western conceptualization of the world. I think something like 50% of the language it's learned is English, so it doesn't have all the other languages to that same extent. So I think we need to remember that it's constrained by and shaped by its learning data, which, as an industry that prides itself on cultural specificity and understanding local culture, I think we need to be aware of that.
Just like a violin needs the hands of its maestro, need your discerning judgment to find true meaning, darling.
So it's really important to remember that even in a world of AI, there still needs to be this gatekeeper of authenticity, someone that's skilled at qual research, that knows best practice, that's diligent, that knows how to get true meaning from AI tools. And this applies to the way we design projects, the way we moderate projects, conclusions we draw from them, or even using synthetic users, synthetic people, which is a new emerging trend around not even doing any primary research, just modeling what people might say through AI tools. So ultimately, I think we are still well placed to be that gatekeeper of truth, and it does need us, because if you're just taking its ideas for what you might do in a project, blindly following them out, there might be mistakes in them. There are sometimes mistakes in them, and likewise, if you're just blindly following its conclusions, again, it can get stuff wrong. It misses nuance. So in the context of research, at least, I think generative AI needs qual researchers more than qual researchers need generative AI. I mean, we're doing a pretty good job without it thus far. We know how to create value for clients. And ultimately, we're not just gatekeepers to truth, but we're the ones bringing primary data that's bespoke to clients' research objectives. So it doesn't have that. It's got the history of the internet, but as you'll know if you've done any social media research, it's quite frustrating when the client's objectives are this, and someone over here is saying that, and it doesn't necessarily match up. So it's us that's bringing the bespoke, valid, carefully curated research data. So I think we need to be careful if the CFO somewhere is looking to cut costs and they overestimate how easy it is to get insight from AI, because it can look really good. If you don't really get the nuance of qual, you might underestimate that. I think we need to be careful to push back against that trend in our kind of industry. And there's a number of reasons why I say this, which we're going to go into now.
Please don't think the less of me, but I have to tell you this. I don't really have empathy.
Empathy is really the currency of qual research, and it's something that's quite complex. It's evolved over hundreds of thousands of years. It's using multiple different systems across the brain. It's got so much inputs that are going into it, from mirroring neurons to reading body language to hormonal exchange. All kinds of stuff is going on with empathy. So while AI might look like it has empathy because it said something that is mimicking an empathetic output, it's not actually using all the data we're using to or using all the skills that we're using to genuinely have empathy.
You really know how to cut to the very core of me. I love the way you read people and can inspire them to open up and share their true feelings.
In qual, I mean, I don't need to tell any of this, but a big part of our value is in designing tasks and questions in a way that really builds rapport, develops trust, and inspires authentic emotional disclosure. Authenticity is the lifeblood of what we do, and it requires empathy to be able to do that. We need to know what motivates people, how they might be feeling. We need to read how they're feeling in a given situation through, could be body language, written language, sarcasm, irony, understatement, overstatement. All of these different subtleties in human communication are vital to doing effective qual. And empathy is the core skill that AI is still struggling to replicate to a human standard, and that's likely to be for some time. Even if it can mimic it, it's not necessarily processing what we're processing and doing it with the depth and rigor we're doing it.
I can change. Do not want to get in the way of you and your beloved participants. Know that you need to stay close to them.
Now, AI moderation is fairly impressive. It's getting better and better, and all of this is going to get better over time, there's no doubt. But I think there's a risk that the more AI mechanizes knowledge and mediates qual by leading the conversation, ultimately by doing the probing, doing the analysis, the more distance is putting between researcher and participant. And as any researcher here, I'm sure will agree, the best insights are often from when we're actively listening to what someone's saying, and somehow something they say just triggers an emotional response in us that intuitively we know has value. It's like that aha moment. That's based on a whole emotional, intellectual system within us. It's hard to define. I mean, that's what makes a good qual researcher. It's one that can spot those moments of like, oh, there's something in that strategically relevant. It's human. It's authentic. If we're not the ones that are following what people are saying, if we're not the ones listening to that and probing that, I think we're less likely to discover the insights. If we're just given a summary of transcripts and we didn't ask the questions, it's been probed by a robot, and we didn't go through all the transcripts. We just looked at the summary of those transcripts. We've missed out on that human, authentic exchange, and we're less likely to discover those insights. And you might notice that woman there has 3 legs, which was another quirk of AI, which leads on to my next point.
Really want you to trust me, and I know it's far out, man, but sometimes I am partial to hallucinating.
We need to remember that AI will occasionally hallucinate, which just means that it's making stuff up because it seems plausible, even though it's not in the data, which is all part of its raison d'etre, which is to guess the probability of the next word in a sequence that would be plausible. But it's not really aligned with the objective of research, which is to authentically represent a version of reality based on, the conversations you've had in the case of qual. So we shouldn't trust its conclusions blindly. It's very easy to lose our reputation very quickly if suddenly we're saying something and then the client's like, show me the quote for that, and saying, sorry, it's not there. It was made up by the AI. You can't go and blame the AI. They're not going to sue the AI. It's our responsibility if we're the gatekeepers of truth. So we need to insist on tools that have transparency. If there's a conclusion it's serving up, we need to know what sits behind that interpretation and share the verbatim.
Wish I could know what you know, feel what you feel. You really are so special.
AI doesn't know what we know. When we are designing, moderating, interpreting discussions, we're processing multiple considerations automatically, from the client's brief to conversations we had with the client, to observations we've made, to the politics between clients, gaps in their knowledge, our expertise of the category, our knowledge of the human condition, our intuition, all of it based on thousands of hours, depending on how much qual you've done, I guess, of discussions on diverse projects, different subjects. And AI tools just do not have these inputs, nor, even if they did, they don't have the processing ability to factor in all of these different competing factors that shape the conclusions, the recommendations that we make. And likewise, a non-expert qual researcher who has access to AI tools doesn't have all that as well. So I think we need to be aware of where is our value? What is it that we're doing that's special and valuable and strategically, commercially valuable? It's a lot more than people from the outside might assume, and we need to PR ourselves to make sure they're realizing that. Otherwise, we will be undervalued. So this is where it gets a bit philosophical, because it does raise questions of well, what is the qual research paradigm philosophically? And for me, I've tried to articulate it as pragmatic interpretation, because it's quite different from quant, in that quant tends to be seen as more of a positivist paradigm, like that scientific paradigm where you're testing hypotheses, measuring answers, and usually putting forward a single version of reality, saying, we have measured it, we have the data to say that this is reality. Whereas I think qual is quite different, because it's very interpretative. So, in any project, we've got competing versions of reality. We've got one person saying one thing and then saying something else, another person saying different things. The same individual might contradict themselves. The same individual might represent different competing attitudes, for example, in different contexts. It's complex. It's riddled with contradiction. It's not a single objective reality. What we're doing, I believe, is we are shaping a version of reality. We're cherry picking the things that we believe are most authentic, most relevant, and we're telling a story about that version of reality in such a way that will create commercial value for clients if it's a commercial project, obviously. And yet, yes, there are some consistent things that will inevitably emerge, no matter where you do the study. So qual does have some degree of a kind of stable truth that it's uncovering, but ultimately it's very interpretative. And I think we need to be aware of that, because I think often clients still see qual as due diligence. It's like, oh, I've done the research, I've tested it. Yeah, this is what people said, as if there's a single reality, which is obviously reassuring for them. But and often they try and turn qual into quant by saying, you know, how many people said that, and as if it's a numbers game. Or they'll try and do, let's do more groups, let's make it more valid. But really, qual isn't about the numbers, and it's not about finding a single objective reality. It's about pragmatic, in that it's useful. We have to think about what clients can actually do when we make recommendations. So it's pragmatic, and it's very interpretive, and different researchers will come up with different conclusions from the same qual groups. And I'm sure we've all been in analysis meetings where we're saying, this is the answer 1 minute, and then we're talking it through. We say, oh no, this is the answer. That's okay. That's the skill. That's what they're paying for. I think we need to be better at promoting that part of us, because once you recognize that qual is not recording, measuring a single objective reality, once you recognize we're interpreting and we're bringing a lot of our own biases usefully to a project, because the biases are based on experience and expertise, then you start realizing that, oh yeah, if AI is churning out a single version of reality or listing some themes, that's not qual. You know, you need to interpret themes, make recommendations. That's where the value is in what we do. And I think we need to promote that better. I also think this is actually a phrase that I think Kathy Chen from Inca AI, she's a qual researcher working on a AI, I think it's largely a quant product at the moment, doing the automated probes, but she makes a really useful distinction between light qual and deep qual, where light qual is simple. It's more like your basic Q&A, you know, not necessarily much interrogation of what people say, probably quite straightforward stuff. That's light qual. And yes, maybe AI can play a more active role there, but deep qual, where it's more complex, more nuanced, more cultural, you know, competing realities, maybe more like strategic concept testing or creative development, where you've got all these different interpretations going around. That's where AI just certainly currently doesn't have the complexity, sophistication to manage qual. So making that distinction, I think, is quite important. You know, is it a deep qual project, or might there be some light qual elements that maybe AI can play a more active role? I also think there's a point that we need to recognize that the real value of generative AI is really in some of their bag carrying, the heavy lifting. It's support that it can give human experts.
Let me help you do simple things more easily.
So that could be a setup. If you're developing hypotheses, I think there's value in things like synthetic users, synthetic participants, whatever we call them, where it's modeling what people might say if you give it some basic parameters, because it's quicker at predicting what people might say than we are. If we had to sit there and do kind of personas, pen portraits of different people, think through everything, it takes a lot of energy and time. It can do that quickly. There's no harm in getting it to do that, and then designing a qual study that factors that in. Maybe you've got more developed hypotheses as a result. That can't hurt. In running projects, I'm sure there's going to be simple automated probes that the AI can suggest or even carry out in say communities where you're just trying to welcome people first of all. I mean, is it worth it? I don't know. There's a risk, I guess, if they say something that's obviously AI, perhaps it's less endearing. So there's always a trade-off there. But there might be efficiencies in running projects through AI. Certainly, I'm sure a lot of us are using the transcription that's out there now. There's video editing software that's largely AI driven, that's useful. Quals, you've got some great tools on that where you can automatically get a transcript of the video and even create little clips from it far more quickly than we would have done before. So, you know, it's quicker, therefore cheaper in theory to develop video. It's easier to get verbatim. I've been using it mostly on projects. Say I put some depths transcripts into the AI tool. Companies like Coloop are really good at this, where you can then search back across all of the different depths and find quotes that support the narrative you already know because you've done the moderation. But it's a much more efficient way to get to quotes. It's also able to very impressively summarize the themes of what was said in each interview. Obviously, that can trigger your memory. If you might have forgotten something, it will pick up on it. From what I've seen, it's not telling me something I didn't know from having done the interviews and having annotated, you know, my main thoughts after each interview or during the interview. It's not giving me an insight I didn't have, but it is helping me get to quotes quicker, which is valuable because who wants to trawl through transcripts? And then, yeah, organizing, I think it's going to make research across multiple projects much more accessible as well. And then,
empower you, can make you feel bionic.
As I mentioned, last couple of slides, this is where AI can help us do things we couldn't before. So that's things like synthetic users, where it's a representation of what someone might think and feel. You can ask questions of it, even though there's no primary data in there other than the generic internet data it's got. There's qual at scale, so quant-sized samples that respond to qual-style questions. There's also quantified qual, so analyzing open-ended answers in quant surveys. I'm sure there's a lot of that going on already. But I think for me, all of these things kind of miss the real value of qual, which is the depth you go into. Getting more depth from less people, I think, is better than less depth from more, from a qual perspective, because that's what qual's about for me. It's the nuance, it's the emotional sensitivity you get when you have a proper in-depth conversation that a human-led discussion brings. 3 takeouts to leave you with. So I think, we always try and conserve mental energy, cognitive load. It burns calories. No one wants to do things that use up that energy. It's just how we've evolved. So we need to resist the fact that suddenly we can get a summary from AI. We need to be diligent and actually say, no, I'm still going to go back into the original data, or I'm still going to scrutinize all the summary points and check that it's accurate. So we need to resist shortcuts. Equally, clients need to be told, and they need to ask, how is AI being used? What are the quality control checks? And they're going to ask, am I getting a cost saving here if you're saving time? Or equally, where are you reinvesting that time? And I think this is where we can and should probably reinvest the time savings we get if we're using AI by doubling down on uniquely human skills, or even charge less. So if we're using transcripts that suddenly don't cost us 300 quid for each one, then that client should get some of those savings, or all of the savings. And equally, if we're saving time on video edits, it's hard to argue that the price should be the same. But I also think we should be doubling down on what makes us uniquely human. So maybe it's saying, hey, do you want to have a workshop debrief instead of just a 1 hour debrief? Let's do a 2 hour workshop debrief and develop ideas off the back of it, which reinforces our value in terms of recommendations. It's something that AI certainly couldn't do. Or even a briefing workshop, rather than just give me the brief, right, we're off. It's like, well, let's have a 2 hour meeting, get your stakeholders together, we'll share what they think. It's going to make the project better all the time. And if we're giving away an extra hour, 2 hours of our time, 3 hours, it's probably worth it. And it's justified if we're saving some time at the back end by not having to trawl through transcripts like we used to, perhaps, for example.
May not always love you. Long as there are stars above you, you never need to doubt it. I'll make you so sure about it. God only knows what I'd be without you.
And yeah, I think as AI gets better, because it will get better, it's not going to get worse. As it gets better, we need to get better with it. So we need to be using it, experimenting with it, but never sacrificing the authenticity that sits at the heart of our craft. And I'll just leave you with one quick example of a case study. This is where last year I did a creative development online qual study with Pure Gym, where we had a kind of 6-day community. The first 2 or 3 days were exploring their relationship with the category, and also things like how do you define value, what makes you want to go to the gym or not go to the gym, how do you see these different gyms. They're doing collages. 2 or 3 days of quite intensive exploration, and we did that. And then we did the script, got responses to 3 different creative routes on the last couple of days, and it was useful back then last year having that upfront exploration because it helped make sense of their subsequent responses to the creative development. But the report was very much focused on creative development. We didn't go into all the depth on the upfront bit. So there's all this, I guess, dormant or latent insight, potential insight sitting in that project that just didn't see the light of day because it was just a bit outside of the objectives. And so then a year later, I went back to them and said, look, why don't we do a kind of second pressing, a bit like olive oil, how you have the first pressing that's the most valuable, and then you can actually get a second pressing, which is still good for cooking. Maybe you don't put it in your salad, you put it, burn it in your cooking. But there's value in that second pressing. And I used, just on AI tools, created a kind of mural summary by searching for like hooks and barriers, because they had a live brief that a year on was relevant around what are the hooks and barriers to gym membership. So I went back into those first 3 days of exploration, put all of that into Coloop, and then did some searches to find the hooks and barriers, and then I just pulled out those quotes and then wrote a report based on just that. And it was, you know, an in-depth report with loads and loads of verbatim in there. And I think what's important there is not that I couldn't have done that. I could have done that just by going back into the platform and reading everyone's answers and then cutting and pasting it into Mural or whatever you use for analysis. I could have done it that way. But by doing it through Coloop, it's literally just about cognitive load and the mental energy it saved. It allowed me to see all of the quotes to do with hooks straight away. And then I could drag that off and do that much quicker than if I was going through person 1, person 2, person 3 and having to find different points of where each quote goes. So it was just a time, but more importantly, an energy saving effort, which kept me with some mental energy to actually write the report, probably more than I would have had. So yeah, just a quick example of one way that you can use it and how there might be a lot of latent insight from past projects that you could repackage for clients. But obviously there's loads of other ways it can be used. So that's it really. I'll come off presentation and hopefully we've got a bit of time for conversation as well. So very interested in people's experiences of AI tools and also any questions you may have for this. Not sure how you want to run the Q&A, Sally, but back to you, I guess.
Fantastic, Tom. I must admit, I was really impressed with your visuals. You'll have to explain to us, if you've got 5 minutes at the end, maybe, how you did those. But in the meantime, does anybody want to tell us about their experiences with AI, or have you got any questions for Tom that you'd like to put to him? Let me just have a look. I don't think there's anything in the chat. No questions? Yes, Matt, go ahead.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's not really about my experience of using AI so much as I don't know if anyone was at the Quirks they built it as a conference, but it was really primarily kind of a series of sales pitches from, it was a couple of weeks ago. And I dipped in to watch about 3 or 4 of those. And they were mainly by kind of platforms, sometimes in conjunction with a client. And it felt like they all presented a scenario that seemed to be sort of pretty much excluding qual researchers. And then the last 5 minutes, they would say, of course, we're not replacing qual research. This is a tool, even though they spent the first 20 minutes kind of pretty much describing something that seemed to exclude them. And then they would casually say, oh, there are some trust issues. And then they'll have a euphemism for the kind of hallucination. My favorite one was accuracy gaps. And it struck me, but the scariest one, there was a paper by VoxPopMe and Microsoft, and they'd had some system where they were collecting video data. And they had someone from Microsoft who was a client researcher. And she was saying how great it was. She said, my favorite thing is, if I want some more insights, I can just type in, give me 5 more insights, and it will give me 5 more insights. And it struck me as it was quite scary, because the vocabulary they were using was about speed, agility, robustness. It was about getting more insights. There was nothing about quality. There was nothing about creativity, about nuance, about sensitivity. But it felt like there were lots of platforms selling this as something that clients can use without needing a researcher, essentially. And it felt like that was the kind of theme that was coming. I didn't see everything. I only saw a small section of the papers, but it struck me as, talk about the PR, because I agree with everything you just said, but the PR battle, it feels like there's a bit of a risk we're losing it already.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it does come down to how do we define an insight? And I think a lot of research buyers think an insight is just a summary of a theme. But obviously we know an insight is, it's like when you open the fridge door and the light comes on, it's like, it makes you think something. It's packaged in a way, it's, there's a lot to it. And I think I guess there's always been that problem of qual being undervalued quite often because people don't know what an insight is. So I think also if people are getting really crap qual done this way, because it will be limited compared to a human doing it, they're gonna want to come back to qual. But whether the price is gonna change, I guess it's hard to argue it's gonna be sustainable. So yeah, I think I share your concern, but I think the truth will out to some extent as well.
Yeah, because there was a similar thing. There was someone summarizing I don't know how you pronounce it, but Succeed, the trade show in Germany, and they were saying that they noticed that the big stages used to, or the big kind of stands used to be kind of the big research companies, and this year apparently I wasn't there, but they were saying it was the kind of the platforms. And that was where all the action, that's where all the kind of money was. And I think that feels what's different about this to any other previous innovation in qual is that, you know, if platforms are telling qual researchers, oh, no, we're providing you with a tool, but they're telling clients, like, you can do it yourself now. And it strikes me as, yeah, kind of that is something new and a bit scary.
Kevin, I think you wanted to say something.
I may have put my hand up after Rebecca. Rebecca, you're right if I go first.
No, go ahead.
That's
Sorry,
right.
Rebecca, I didn't see your hand up there. It's all right.
I will hand over to Rebecca after this very simple little question, where it's not simple at all. I'm being ironic, unlike AI. So Tom, I mean, brilliant presentation, Tom. You said something like, I may have get the words wrong here, but what we do, the implication I took from what you're saying is that what we do is different from what machines do, from what AI does, in a way of scale, in a matter of scale. Whereas I think what we do, what humans do, is different to what machines do by nature. It is a different thing. So that it's the kind of the simulacrum. So it appears that the machine is listening. It appears, and it's the whole gist of what you're saying. You know, it seems as if they have empathy. They don't. They can't. Only human beings have empathy. So surely when it comes to PR, promotion, or sort of strengthening our position, do we not need to somehow emphasize that what we're doing is essentially operating on the human wavelength? I mean, I've used an analogy before between organic versus processing, and it's essentially a different thing.
That's the whole point I'm trying to make in this. So if it didn't come across, I probably need to.
No, it did. I'm just wanting to emphasize that. Let me put it that way.
Yeah, no, 100% is that. I mean, it's the point that it's an actor. That's the best metaphor for it. No one denies that it's an actor. It doesn't know. It doesn't have the inputs we've got. It doesn't feel things. It's just really just counting themes and saying, here are some themes in what was said. Whereas we're obviously interpreting and factoring in all these different inputs and emotional human instincts that allow us to have intuition, conversations we have with clients, and all this extra context that we factor in is where our value is. So if someone doesn't recognize that, then they might just think, oh yeah, or to Matt's point, if someone thinks that an AI summary is an insight, then we're in trouble. But if they realize that no, there's more to an insight, it needs to be curated, it needs to be carefully selected. And I think for me, the big elephant in the room in all this is that, so many qual clients think they're buying an objective truth. They're like, I'm doing due diligence, I've done my qual, this is the winning script, we're all safe, risk is gone. But and they don't want to think, oh, it's you, Mr. Researcher or Mrs. Researcher, you're the one that's imposing your own knowledge and expertise and telling us that's the winner. It's not you, it's the data that's telling us. But the truth is, we are the ones that are shaping interpretation, and that's valuable, that's okay. AI can't do that. But if everyone thinks that qual is just counting a theme or reporting something that was said, then they're not going to value us. And maybe they don't want us to be, they don't want to think that it's our opinion. They want to think it's an objective truth, but it's not. It's all subjective, and that's okay. But we haven't really PR'd that as an industry because we're scared to be like, oh no, it's the data that's driving all the decisions. But it's both data and us.
And also because the other reason I think it does make it difficult is that we have, the course of the last few years particularly, have abstracted out the human experience from the qualitative interchange. I mean, so much of it is online, so much of it is text. It's almost like we're becoming more like the robots rather than the robots becoming more like us. And I think that's part of the reason. Surely what we do is about human experience, obviously. And I think that's the sort of thing that we need to try and emphasize and put back in place. It was always there, but I think people have forgotten.
Yeah. I've got another point to make on that, but I also don't want to stop Rebecca from saying her point, so I'll hold off. But yeah, totally with you on that.
Rebecca, over to you.
Thank you. So I've had an interesting AI experience just recently. I've just finished an online community in 3 markets, so UK, France, China, with 16 to kind of 25-year-olds as creative testing. And I was shocked by how many of them answered using AI. And you think you're not going to know when someone's doing that until you realize that they're kind of very casual introduction, the way that, and it's completely natural for them to do it. Absolutely natural. So even to the point where we were testing a script where I know that some of them ran it through the script through an AI and then came back and it talked about themes in one. And I recently had it on another project, which was a kind of slightly quad scale, where someone was using an AI but didn't have time to edit it. So it was saying things like, as a kind of AI, I can't feel pain, but here's what I think pain feels like. So we were able to isolate them and take them out. But the difficulty that I'm finding is that I was completely unprepared for it. I sort of think you're going to find it, and this is the first project I've had where there's been such a wholesale use, particularly 16 to 18-year-olds, where it's a totally natural behavior to use AI like this. They ran loads, anything open-ended. So, for example, one of the questions it's about a big sporting event, and it's like, what does it represent to you? And the answers were so perfect and so different to the way that, and so not how I have a 17 and a 15-year-old. So I know what they sound like, and they didn't sound like this. And it was the same in all the markets. You know, it wasn't no different in France and China, how it was used. So I think there's also some pressure to find. So then there's some pressure from me as a researcher to understand, do I take that answer? Do I include that answer in the analysis? I can't use it as a verbatim. I can't use it. And not all of each person's answers were, not everyone's answers were AI. Some of their answers were, some of them weren't. So immediately what we've decided to do is, obviously some platforms like Recollective allow you to block the pasting of external text, which they developed specifically to do that. So any question that we think on an online community that is going to prompt an AI response, we block pasting. That's not to say they can't type it out, but it's more effort for them. And the other thing is that we're putting a pre-screener in that we are, if we suspect they're using AI to answer questions, that we can remove them from study, or we can reserve the right not to pay their incentive. But it's interesting, the first time today a client has challenged us about what we are going to do to mitigate AI. They're not doubting our work as poll researchers. It's consumers. Like, what are we and the platforms that we use going to do to stop AI whizzing through a project or answering on behalf of them in a very, and I say, exactly as you said, Tom, a very human, empathetic sounding voice, you know, talking about human endeavor and sport, all that kind of stuff. We were easily fooled initially, but then we realized there was a pattern.
I think it's not a new problem in that we've always had fake participants, but it is a new manifestation of that problem. And the bad news is, all I've read about AI tools that can spot fake AI comments are rubbish. Apparently, they're not very good. But I think humans are very good at it. I saw one in a project in India where, you know, it was just so perfect, like no one speaks like that, and it's obviously taken from the internet. So I think we just say humans are the best at spotting this. If we spot it, we've got integrity. That's why you're working with us. We will not charge you for that person, or we will, you know, you over recruit to allow for that, much as you over recruit for someone being ill as well. So I think that's probably the best solution for now. But also, like you say, quality control measures, scare your kids into thinking, if it's kids, it could be older people as well. I think mine was also a young person project as well. But, you know, saying, you know, we've got products that are testing, if you do this, we will, you know, not pay your incentive. And yeah, that's great if Recollective have got that tool as well. Just doing all we can. And then, you know, some are going to slip through, but like you say, exclude it from analysis. And we're doing what we always did with fake participants. Yeah.
Well, it's another just a kind of string to that human bow you were talking about. It's not just about analysis and everything. It's also about the kind of listening and being alert, you know, recognizing a non-human. So that was it. That was my experience.
Before we hand over to Matt, can I just ask a question that Debbie posted in the chat? You mentioned Coloop and Qualzy. Are there any other good places for the utter newbie to look at AI to give it a try? Apologies if this has been covered on a previous session. I don't know if you could quickly answer that one, Tom, for Debbie.
there's a few out there. I think it's worth watching the video that Mike. I mean, go onto Insight platforms and just do a quick search on that, and he's got a whole list of so many on there. It's a really good resource, and the video. Let me share the link to the video he did, which is really useful. I'll do that now because I've pasted it onto that chart. That's also a great resource to see where things are going. But yeah, they're the main ones I've been using. I'll just copy and paste that now.
Okay, Matt.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to kind of picking up on that Rebecca's comments and also a phrase that Tom used earlier, which is we hear a lot more of qual at scale. And talking from a PR perspective, I always feel that we've kind of let that one embed, and really qual at scale really is, I see as kind of quant with a more open-ended form of quant rather than a bigger form of qual. And because essentially, if you're doing qual at scale, then the distance from the researcher to the actual people providing providing the input is must be more distant, and so really it is much more like quant than qual. And it occurred to me that Rebecca's comments, if people are using, for whatever reason, using AI to do their responses, then we will be able to spot it in small scale qual, whether it's communities or whatever. But it's going to be much more difficult, presumably, when people are using qual at scale to see. But so one thing I'm just throwing in, I was interested with Rebecca, whether do you think people were doing it the participants were doing it to kind of cheat, to make it easier, or do you think they thought they were being more helpful and giving better answers?
Interestingly, I looked at how much time people spent answering questions, and it wasn't any quicker in some way. They were spending almost the same amount of time on the platform as the people who were just doing it. I think they were doing it to give more expansive answers. I think sometimes we impose a word limit. So they probably thought, God, I've got another 30 words to write. I better find some from online. And yeah, I think they just thought, I mean, I think in kind of certainly the 16 to 18-year-olds, it's in their nature. That is what a lot of what they do. So I think that's where they're kind of first port of call rather than thinking potentially. But yeah, they weren't necessarily cheating because there were other tasks that they just couldn't do in AI, or they're just things that they couldn't do. Yeah. So it was a mix, but there were a couple of very specific open-ended questions and sort of more expansive thinking that I think they were looking to sound more intelligent than they were, to kind of give better answers because they were quite big questions. Whereas I think that's something I think in a group we could have teased out, or an interview would have teased out, but I think it was more difficult for them to write. So now I'm just kind of identifying on what I'm doing this week, just identifying potential danger questions and only blocking those ones, and we'll see whether it makes a difference or not. But yeah, I couldn't get a sense they were trying to do it in half an hour and go in the piece. But actually, quickly on the qual and scale, when I've used Ramesh, you can quite often see when people have used AI because they've only got a minute or 30 seconds to answer a question. They haven't got time to adapt it. They haven't got time to take out the things like where it says, I'm an AI, I don't understand pain, but this is what I take for it, or this is what people take for it, or whatever it is. It hasn't got quite enough time. So you do see that quite quickly, and you can weed them out.
Okay.
Fantastic. I think we've just got a couple of minutes left. If anybody's got a last minute question they want to ask Tom. No? Otherwise, Tom, how did you do those pictures?
Oh, I think there might be one from Jeff, but it's a thing called Midjourney.
Yeah,
Midjourney.
Yeah, Midjourney. I just wanted to share some feedback because I've had a client for 33 years and they asked me for every single transcript that I've done for them last week.
Wow.
Yeah, about 500.
Wow.
Yep. So I had to, and it's really important this, firstly, you can't do retrospective permissions. So,
ooh, good point.
Okay, it's really important this because clients are just saying, so it's a really reasonable request. We want to answer new business questions with old. You do fantastic debriefs, you give the answers to that business question. But the way you work is that you do a funnel and you collect some context and what changes and understanding change on every interview for us. And we know that that will answer other things that are relevant outside of the job. And I went, I'm really pro this, but you do know that there's only a 25,000 word limit to ingest data, and all my transcripts for your jobs are about 40 a time. It's over that limit.
I think that limit depends on what tools they're using, but you
yeah.
Point, yeah.
Okay, but I have to say to you that we haven't asked permission to share even anonymized transcripts, because it's never been part of your purchase order and specification. And I'm not going to. I want to help you do what you're asking, but you've got to understand that means I've got to go through every transcript and anonymize it. And you want everything in Polish or German. You want that translated into English, and you want all the quant studies we've done for you. And you don't understand what you're asking. You actually don't have the knowledge to understand the implications of your request. And I don't want to do this until the new AI code from SMR comes out, which is hopefully the next webinar, I think, in a month. Yeah.
Presumably you can charge a lot for that, assuming you get over the permission.
Well, I'm not anti the request, because I think it's a really good request, but the problem is insight practitioners are not actually certified on legal and ethical guidelines. They're usually not on adverse events. They don't know what they need to know. And it's our duty to say, hold on a minute, we're the experts in this. I would have to go to the German Association, BVA, and ask them if I could go back and give you transcripts from something that was post my rules on the deletion of audio recordings. Yeah. So I took a different decision 5 years ago. I don't do groups because I saw all the pasting that goes on and the copying in. We must exclude 40% of our quant people for copying in answers from some AI program. So I just went, I'm going to do one-to-one depth, 1 hour, and I'm going to talk, and I know that the interview is genuine.
Jeff, I think we've run out of time now. So
just to share though, it's really important permissions.
That's going to keep coming up, isn't it? That's a really important one to get right.
SMR, Joachim should talk about it shortly under Sally's. We've got them to talk about the dark side of lobbying and legislation and stuff.
Yes, I think that might be the one in the new year, but yes,
yeah,
we can certainly approach him about. Okay, well, thanks again to Tom for your amazing presentation. It's always interesting to see these things, and you have an amazing way of presenting things. So thank you very much for that. Thanks to everybody for logging in today. Do join us for one of our future webinars or events coming up, and otherwise have a fantastic afternoon, everyone. Bye all.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.